Now, excellent. Thank you everyone for registering. I'll just quickly acknowledge country. We do acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands upon which we are all meeting today. We acknowledge that they have occupied and cared for these lands over countless generations, and we celebrate their continuing contributions to the regions across which we meet. We acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging, and I particularly pay my respects to any Aboriginal people joining us on the webinar today. Today we have a bit of a one-off webinar, which just came about because the Commonwealth Department of Health and Aged Care has been working with a number of experts in the community in the aged care sector to really improve the design of residential aged care accommodation. It's something that I know a lot of providers think deeply about. It's something that needs to keep moving, to keep pace with new models of care. It's something that needs to keep moving to keep pace with changing consumer expectations as well. And there's some draft guidelines that have been released, and it's a rather hefty document, but when you go through it, it's a really useful and interesting document. And this webinar is really to help people engage with that a little bit more, spread knowledge about these draft guidelines a little bit more, and then work towards their introduction on 1st of July 2024. So this session is just going to run through the content of these principles and guidelines, really relevant to CHA members, whether they be aged care executives, whether they be property or asset professionals, but also caregivers, people who are working day to day with people who are living in these environments. So I'm really, really pleased that we've been able to get a great expert panel together. The first speaker will be Robert Day, who's the Assistant Secretary of the Dementia, Diversity and Design Branch of the Commonwealth Department of Health and Aged Care. And then we've also got Nick and Liz from Constructive Design Architects, and they'll be finishing off the presentation. At any stage, if you have questions, you can drop them in the Q&A, either with your name or anonymously, or put them in the chat, and I'll just butt in every now and then and read your questions out where appropriate. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Robert. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for your interest in this work. I think we're at a really exciting time with the design principles and guidelines, both in terms of being able to share a product with everyone, but also to gather that input back around, have we missed anything in the principles and guidelines? And more importantly, what's it going to take to see them adopted and implemented across the sector? The rough plan is I'm going to give you a very brief context to this work. Nick and Liz, who are really the experts, will take you through the design principles and guidelines. And then I'll circle back at the end with a little bit about where we're at in terms of those implementation measures. You probably know this work originates from the Royal Commission, which found that the traditional design of an institutional aged care home wasn't the best environment for the older people who lived in it, and that there was value in good design to create a more enabling space for people that was accessible, that was dementia friendly, and that helped to mitigate and soothe the frailties and the cognitive impairment that are the reason that people need to seek residential care in the first place. And we know from the work that we've been doing that there are benefits both for people living in aged care homes and for the people who work in those homes if we can get the design right. And so I think for me, one of the really exciting things about the design principles and guidelines is that chance to bring together the practical knowledge of people who live and work in aged care homes and the practical knowledge of architects and designers who are experts in those fields, and make available some guidance on what best practice is. Thanks, Naomi. I'll flick on to the next slide. So we've been working for the last couple of years to develop these principles and guidelines, and we deliberately started with the question of what does good design look like? We tried briefly to think about what would it take to implement the guidelines and what would be in those guidelines at the same time, and that was too much of a challenge. So we focused the first rounds of consultation on getting that information about what, from the perspective of people living in aged care, their families, people who might be looking to go into aged care in future, and aged care providers and workers, what does good design look like? And we did that both with a series of discussion papers and a survey. And we then took that information and we gave that to a consortium of people led by the University of Wollongong to combine that information with the latest research and professional evidence to develop the draft principles and guidelines that we have out in public at the moment. And there was a number of targeted consultations and focus groups and workshops that supported that consortium team in developing that product. And that then led us to these design principles and guidelines, which were released in September for comment. And I'll hand over in a moment to Nick and Liz to talk you through what's included. But we're very much at the point now of that final testing of have we got these right, and then asking the questions, what's it going to take to implement them broadly across the sector? So I'll throw over to Nick and Liz to take you through in some more detail.
Okay, now if we go on to the next slide, we're going to stay on this for just a little bit. So firstly, I'm acknowledging as well that we're speaking to you from the land of the Gadigal clan of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I also want to acknowledge that I understand we're speaking to a large range of providers within the Catholic, within the world of the Catholic Church supporting aged care and providing aged care. And the experiences that we've had working with different Catholic aged care providers has been of a group of people that have been really committed and like a strong resource to the whole sector. And I think it's worth calling that out and saying that we've had experience after experience of working with Catholic providers where there's a strong commitment to the way in which different services provide a strong resource to the community. And I think it's something which I think it's one of the achievements of the Catholic Church in Australia, and something everyone involved should really be quite proud of. So give you a brief introduction further to us. So we're part of it. We run a firm called Constructive Dialogue Architects. I've also got a separate role, which is within Dementia Training Australia, which is an aged care we're a workforce training organisation funded by the department. And so through those two roles, I get to both be involved in the construction of new buildings, the design of new buildings, as well as training people in how they can set up supportive environments. And we've had this particular focus on how we fix up buildings that might be a legacy to an organisation of something that was built a while ago and may not reflect what they need it to do now. So that's sort of me and my background.
And I'm Liz. I'm Liz Fuggle. I'm another architect. I'm from Scotland, originally trained in the UK, and worked as an architect on aged care projects there for quite a long time, for about 10 years. And also for Stirling University, where you may know of the Dementia Centre there, which is maybe the birthplace of dementia design, and I'm putting that into practice. I moved to Australia 7 years ago to be part of Hamacare, part of their capital works team, which was fantastic opportunity to see the inside workings of an Australian aged care provider, particularly one that was doing interesting and very good things in the environment space. And then latterly worked with DSA as well, Dementia Support Australia, specifically targeting the environmental interventions that you can do to support individuals living with dementia. And then about a year and a half ago, I joined Constructive Dialogue Architects to work with Nick on projects here, which has been wonderful to be back on the tools and be involved in some exciting aged care projects, as well as this fantastic resource, which we were just privileged to be involved with. And we're going to just there it is.
So
yeah,
this being the what we're going to talk about today and what we're going through today was a fantastic recognition by the government of the significance and importance of the physical environment on people living in residential aged care homes, and the way in which the environment has got a direct impact and effect on people's well-being, their behaviour. And I think before going into the detail of what's in this document, I think it's important to really acknowledge why is the environment so important, and where does it really come into things? When I was thinking this through in preparation for a conference a couple of weeks ago, I had the experience of trying to think through what's the best way of explaining this. And I walked out of a toilet. I'd gone to the bathroom just before. I walked out of the bathroom just before my own session, and I was confused by the fact that I felt that there were women walking into my bathroom. I turned left to leave the bathroom with what I thought was the airlock and almost walked into the women's toilet until somebody stopped me. So a bit of an embarrassing experience. And it was just because the environment was that confusing to me. Mm. It was dark. It wasn't clear which way I was meant to go.
And you were under stress as well.
I was under stress.
A little bit under stress for the impending presentation.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah.
So that was one experience where I felt pretty stupid. And I was having difficulty working my way out of an environment. I had another experience about 3 years ago, which was actually in a Catholic healthcare facility, in which we were actually doing some work looking at a few different buildings. And in that building, I was moving between different areas through a fire stair, and I didn't have my mobile phone. Unfortunately, I got locked in the fire stair, and I literally sat there going, I'm in a fire stair. I was trying to get through a building, through a back area. I'm locked and I don't know when somebody's going to find me. And I was in the unfortunate position of banging on this door to get into a closed unit to support people with high cognitive impairment. And I was there banging on it, trying to get in, having that experience of feeling locked in. And these experiences for me are just about the fact that in a very blunt way, the physical environment affects our sense of who we are, of how we can get around, our function and our levels of stress. So when we start talking about the environment, we talk about ideas like cognitive load and the fact that somebody is moving into an aged care home because they've got different challenges. They've got a range of sensory challenges, cognitive challenges, things which are impairments that are quite common within the cohort of people, quite common in older people, and are often the prompt for somebody to move in. So things which are sensory challenges and cognitive challenges. And in an ideal world, we want the environment to help compensate for those. If a building, and before going into the detail of it, if a building is overloading me with things that I need to process, with noise, with clutter, with busyness, there's a lot for me to process at a point where I may have more difficulty doing that than I do today. If at the moment my eyesight already is not what it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but at a point where I'm moving into an environment at which various things might have affected my eyesight, there's a reasonable expectation the environment is going to be brighter, easier to see, easier to work my way around. And the issues that we face once we look at aged care homes go beyond that, because they're often places where the very nature of them means that there's some sort of managed environment where they're going to be slightly less familiar than my home was. And in a lot of homes, the challenge is that my ability to retreat, my ability to go away from it, my ability to not being in a public situation is also challenged. And so my stress levels may be higher. And so we look at all these things where agitation, anxiety, a desire to get outside or get away from a place, these are normal things. They're normal responses. If I feel trapped, if I feel that a place is noisy, if I feel it's difficult. And so what we tried to build this document on were things where we look at it and say, these are normal responses to an environment, and how can we make buildings better?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what you've now got, going into the details of the document, what you've now got here on the left-hand side are the 4 principles that we started with. We were asked by the government to put together a set of principles and guidelines that gave clarity to what should aged care be built upon, as in what's the framework. And there's a big piece of a review of literature, a review of the research and practice that went into the development of these. But it came down to 4 things. These were 4 ideas where we see these as reasons why people move into care. And these are internationally supported ideas of aged care environments, aged care homes need to provide some response, some support to address these 4 issues. And when we walk into any aged care building across the country, to some extent, they may be doing this already. They may be doing it in a way which can be taken further. They may be doing it really well. But these were the 4 ideas that we came to. And the idea was, if a building is already in existence and we're looking at it, we can find ways with each of these to improve an existing building, to make it more supportive, but it came back to these 4 guiding principles. And so the first one was that buildings should be enabling. They should make it easier for us to navigate, find our way around. They should support our well-being in very immediate functional ways. The second one was about cultivating a home, and this might allow space for a range of different models of aged care home, but it comes down to, if I've left my family home and I'm moving into a new place, what makes it feel like home to me? And we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. The third one being getting outdoors. It's an unfortunate reality that at a point where people are potentially challenged by their mobility already, it's harder to get outdoors. Moving into an aged care home reduces the likelihood of getting out to gardens and balconies even further, and that's a problem for a range of reasons that we'll also unpack in a second. And the fourth one being, if already I've had more difficulty getting to church, staying connected to friends, being part of my neighbourhood, if I want that move into an aged care home, can challenge that even further. So those 4 principles were enabling the person, cultivate a home, access the outdoors, connect with community. You see those on the left-hand side of the screen. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that sitting underneath those 4 principles are 31 different guidelines. Let's start to flesh that out a little bit further. And what we'll do now is we'll move on to the next slide, and I'll hand over to you to unpack one of these in a bit more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Naomi. So this is a typical guideline. This is guideline 2.3, sitting under cultivate a home. And each of the guidelines is laid out exactly like this. We've got a short description, a statement about what we mean by domestic kitchens, which is the name of the guideline. We have a slightly longer description of what we're trying to achieve through the guideline. That's on the top right hand side, next to a diagram which is supposed to evoke something about the idea of what the kitchen is trying to do, or what the guideline is trying to do. So in this case, it's that central position, that relationship with the living and dining spaces, and the fact that it's, domestic size, that sort of thing. On the right and the left-hand side, in the orange boxes there, you'll see the scenario, what's called a scenario and an outcome. Now, these describe different, essentially a scenario by different people who we have made up. So the fictional people, personas, 3 fictional residents and 3 fictional staff members. It was really important for us in the writing of these and through consultation to ensure that when people picked up the guidebook, they didn't just think of it in terms of rules and information, but they could really see the person through the guidance, that they could really see the objectives of what we're trying to achieve, which is better quality of life for people living and working in aged care. So the personas, which we produced through both consultation, but specifically working with Dementia Support Australia, to create people that were realistic and representative of who might be living in aged care in Australia today. They represent and are used for different sort of scenes. On the left-hand side, it's the sort of starting point prior to any design intervention. It sort of sets the scene of what might be happening in an aged care home. And then on the right-hand side, you've got an outcome of what might happen if you implement something through the design intervention. So we hope that that really, and the feedback we've got has been positive, that really helps people to understand what could in reality be going on for people living in aged care today, and what the impact on a person might be just through design. The rationale statement, which is on the left-hand side, that is really the unpacking of the evidence. So very clearly referenced at the back of the resource, why this guideline is important, in a lot of detail in terms of the referencing, and then what specifically makes it a difference practically. And then we have a section called the checklist, which is a more free-form section where we have suggested a few different ideas under this guideline, which could be relevant to your home, or it may not be relevant, but things to prompt you to really think practically, what are the steps we can take, and they may be related to something that your architect might do, or it might be something that a maintenance person might do, or a care staff member on the ground might be able to do. So thinking really broadly about how everybody can be involved in the design process. So that's, I guess, a typical guideline laid out for you.
Now, Jason, I think you've just sent through a text saying there's some questions coming through. Was there anything you wanted to throw in at this point in time?
Yeah, I think I'll throw this question through to Rob. And the questions come through from Penny. We still have 10 4-bedded rooms with shared bathrooms in our residential aged care facility. Will there be any financial or grant support to bring this situation into the 21st century?
Really good question, Penny. And one of the most common questions I get when I talk about these principles and guidelines. Got two parts of my answer for you, and it depends a little bit whereabouts in the country your home is based. There is still some capital grants specifically for rural, remote and special needs areas. And there was a grant opportunity advertised just earlier this week, I believe, with the latest round of capital funding in those areas. At this stage, there's not a direct connection to the design principles and guidelines, but I think it's a fairly safe bet that once we get beyond July next year, there'll be a question in those capital grant rounds around how is this helping you get closer to the design principles and guidelines. The bigger question, which affects everyone in the sector, is where's the capital come from to take those next steps to get better in the design. That's something that at the moment we're looking at in the context of the Aged Care Task Force and what is the total amount of funding that is available to support the sector in the delivery of care, but also in the maintenance and the creation of new buildings, or the retrofitting of existing buildings. So the implementation of these principles and guidelines will coincide fairly closely with the conclusion of the work of the task force and what that means for the financial picture for the whole sector. I will say, and Nick may well want to jump in on this, that the advice I'm getting is that there are some parts of these principles and guidelines that can be adopted comparatively easily and are intended to be picked up as part of routine maintenance or minor upgrades. We're deliberately trying not to have a situation where everything's got to be a brand new build to get closer to what these principles and guidelines look like.
I'm going to pick up.
I'll just quickly say, Robert, the locations come through as Lismore. I'll touch base with you or Naomi from the department at the end and make sure we get Penny information that's relevant to Lismore.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Naomi, if we can go on to the next slide, I'm going to pick up an answer as part of looking at this next slide. But if we move on to the next slide, this goes into principle 1. And I'm not sure the extent to which the people who are participating in this have an ability to send in chats personally, but I'm going to just, as a starting point, to prompt people to look at these two images and see how we've written the documents, a little bit of an exercise for a couple of minutes, in which in the principles and guidelines, what you're seeing there is exactly what appears at the beginning of each of these principles. So I'm opening up a book. You can see there that there's a book which has these two images in it exactly. So On the left, you've got a before image, and on the right, you've got an after image. So what I'm doing, sort of a call out to everybody watching, have a look at those two images. If you can, write a response into the chat. If you can't, just have a think about what it would be. What's the difference between the one on the left and the one on the right? When looking at the one on the left, what are the things there that might make it feel like it's not, or make it appear not to be quite so great? Or what are the things which are challenging to somebody who's a resident there? On the right, what's that image showing which is a sort of positive step forward? So it's really a bit of a Where's Wally game of looking at the left and right, the before and after, what's not great about the before, and what's positive about the after. So if people want to just have a chance of putting things into the chat, or if they've got access to the chat, or the Q&A if they don't, of just their responses of what's the difference, what's problematic or challenging about the before, what's positive about the after. While you're looking at doing that, I'll just say a little bit more about the way that we wrote this up. So the way in which we structured the principles and guidelines, we were very conscious that there are elements of the environment which we remake every day. So every day as staff move into a place, they're either leaving a place cluttered or they're leaving it less cluttered. There are certain things which make a building noisy or less noisy. So even just the way in which we go about and we engage with a building on a daily basis has a big effect on the lives of residents. It's very clear in this first principle that we're going to unpack a little bit more in terms of that daily activity. And that's the work that DTA, funded by the department, does of supporting workforce in thinking about what makes the building that they've got more or less supportive.
The classic one for this is actually just opening the curtains. So often we go into care homes and the curtains are half over the windows, and reducing the amount of natural light. And natural light is free, and it's so good for people, just from a vision point of view, from an accessibility point of view, and from to train your circadian rhythm. So and that's such an easy thing to do, is to open curtains really wide. So that's one I've noticed in these images, for example.
And one of the other things which somebody mentioned in the Q&A was about the lighting, about the view to the outside. Yeah. And there's a comment about one being quieter. Mm-hmm. And so running through the different elements to just add on to, those comments are spot on. The different things which we looked at were literally what makes one more personalised or more personalisable. What makes clutter is a real problem. The one on the left, it's cluttered, there's institutional signs, there's a whole lot of things that make it look like and feel like more of a hospital as opposed to somebody's home. The removal of the nurse station, the hand wash basin, which has been brought up by one person, yes, we've looked at this and said that nurse station as the focus of this room doesn't make it look like somebody's living room. It doesn't make it look like a place that I live. It makes it look like I'm in the waiting room to something which is a health facility. And so those different issues come through there. I'm just seeing if there are any other comments. The domestic furnishings. Mm-hmm. So we looked at other things like acoustic comfort, as well as so domestic furnishings we looked at in terms of what makes it something which I'm familiar with, and as well as what makes something more noisy or less noisy. And
also the seating, it's still supportive. So that's one of the guidelines, is that seating needs to be ergonomically suitable for people and robust and all those sorts of things. It's not just that it has to look familiar and look domestic, but it has to perform well for the setting as well.
So the other ideas we went through, and there's a lot we're going to go through in the next 10 minutes. So to just run through, the other things which we listed here were brighter lighting because our eyes need more light. Tonal contrast between the floor and the walls because it makes it easier for somebody to find their way around. The circulation being simple, the floors being safe, there being seating. These different issues, some of them relate to the way in which we set up a space on a daily basis. Some relate to the changes we make if we're doing standard refurbishment of a facility. So flooring only ever lasts about 10 years. At that point of people changing over flooring, can that tie into what's actually happening as part of general upkeep of a building? And beyond that, then there's the scope for larger change in terms of what people have an ability to do in terms of a larger change to a building that addresses some of those other larger issues.
Yeah.
I'll just draw you to the Q&A again, Nick and
See
Liz.
that Dan's comment there on it can be difficult to remove enunciators and emergency exit signs, etc. So I think that's true. There's obviously there's signage that's required from a legislative point of view, but there's definitely ways where we can reduce the signage that's not compulsory, and there's lots of ways of being clever about absolutely maintaining compliance, but doing things in a way that's attractive and out of sight. So actually, in this image we have taken the exit sign out, but in a way I think we could still keep it in on the right hand image without losing the overall feel of the whole space. And also to acknowledge that most of the time things that are really above eye level are less obtrusive to people living in aged care. So that is one way you can deal with signage, is mounting it very high level. Say if you really do require it for staff and it's out of the line of sight of most residents. But that's a really good point.
One of the other things, the main thing which I wanted to look at in terms of just wrapping up principle one was what we're trying to say over and over again here is we approach any environment with whatever impairments we've got. I'm wearing glasses, my eyesight is impaired, but the glasses are a way in which I create something which makes it able for me to operate in my daily life in a building in a way which doesn't leave me disabled by the environment. So we very much followed through an idea that what creates disability is primarily an environment, a larger sense of environment in terms of the building, the light levels, the furniture, the social supports around us. This broader idea of an environment is what turns an impairment into something which is actually disabling me and not allowing me to go about living the life that I want to live. I want to live. And in that sense, at each point, it might be that this is an objective. Maybe we can't always achieve all of that. Sometimes an impairment becomes so great that no matter what we do with the environment doesn't enable that change. But a lot of what actually challenges me and puts me into a position where I'm less able to function is actually about what the environment is doing.
Yeah, it's an interesting one that one of the highest, well, the main reason for people being referred to Dementia Support Australia, the main contributing factor is actually pain. So that people are predominantly who are being referred are in it turns out that when they're reviewed, pain is the biggest issue. And it's interesting, even thinking about the environmental impacts on what that might have, like in terms of non-pharmacological interventions for someone who's in pain. There's so much you can do in terms of providing distraction, of providing a comfort in terms of the right seating, or providing engagement within the environment. So it's I suppose we're very used to thinking about design all the time because we're architects, but our hope is to really open everybody's eyes to the opportunities within the environment to enable people. What can we do to make things better through design?
The next three principles we're going to go through fairly quickly in order to get to the third part of this conversation where there's more of a discussion about the next steps. But to just go through this, Naomi, if you can go to the next slide. Do you want to just give a potted summary of what this one's about? Yeah,
sure. So cultivating a home now that is absolutely key to someone feeling that they belong. We know that everybody living in aged care is telling us that they want to feel and be at home. I think that kind of almost goes without saying, but what does that look like in reality? What are the components of a home-like environment? For these guidelines, one of the key ideas was of that small scale, and the bulk of the research looking particularly around dementia design is that small, and by that we mean 15 beds and under, really provides much better environment for people for many reasons. So there's lots of evidence to show that people function better, that they have better mood, that they have better quality of life outcomes, that they are more sociable, more able to socialize if the unit number if the household number of bedrooms is 15 beds or under. So that was a kind of clear move that we felt that had to be included in the guidelines.
And if we move to the next slide, Naomi. So the third principle is about getting outdoors. And again, it's the same idea of an image before and after. The environment, we think, is the key to getting people outside, as in if the door's locked, people don't go outside. But if an environment makes it hard for people to be supported going outside, if it makes it hard for people to get there, hard for staff to feel comfortable supporting somebody going outside, they don't go outside. And the significance of getting outdoors in terms of just straight primary health issues of exercise being important, access to daylight being important for our bone density, the access to daylight being important for us maintaining circadian rhythms, it just being important for our mental health. It's there on so many different levels. This principle goes through the ideas of an outdoor space being visible, it being an identifiable outdoor area that people can go to, it being something that we can activate in some ways by staff setting it up to invite people outdoors, there being destinations, clear pathways, it being a safe place to go to. If we go to the fourth principle, Naomi.
That's around connecting with community, and we all know that as well as having private space, and that's really critical to mental well-being, is having your own private space, but actually connection to public space is also really a sort of fundamental need that we all have, and the beauty of being able to have wider connection or better connection with the community in which the care home sits is that you have the opportunity to just improve the quality of lives of people living more broadly in the local community by connection to the group of older people that are living in the care home. So from a societal point of view, I think this is really important, as well as a quality of life thing for people living in the home itself.
At this point, the next slide, Naomi, and Rob, we're throwing it back to you. So
Thanks, Nick. Just got to wait for the camera to catch up. There we go.
Excellent.
Just demonstrating my technical proficiency for everyone. So look, I think that the last part for me, and it sort of all goes to the question that Penny's already asked us, is what does it take to support adoption of these principles and guidelines? And there's a couple of things I'd like to share with you in that space. I think the first is that there is something significant in the term principles and guidelines. We're very conscious, and I know that Nick and the team and Nick and Liz and the team have been very conscious in pulling this document together, that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, that we want to have some degree of flexibility to adapt the design of a home to the site, to the community that you're serving, the particular needs, and to have some choice and variability within the sector as a whole as well. So there's something significant in that term, principles and guidelines. The other thing is that we're very conscious that upgrading the physical outlay of a building takes time. And so when we say that the principles and guidelines will come into effect on the 1st of July next year, that doesn't mean that every home around the country is going to be expected to meet every part of the principles and guidelines from that date. It means that that's the date that we start from, or move from having a draft to having a final version of the principles and guidelines with some measures around it that support their implementation and adoption. Exactly what those principles, or sorry, what those implementation measures looks like will be a decision for government. And that will be based on the feedback that we're getting right now on the draft of the design principles and guidelines. I can expect that there'll be a range of different measures looking at the different things that we think will support adoption. So some of that will be around information and education, both for people working in aged care, but also for architects and designers. But thinking about things like what's the funding, how do we use informed consumer choice to support or to create incentives for people to move towards these principles and guidelines. They're all the sorts of things that are in the mix. So I would highlight for you. There is a survey that's out at the moment to capture some of that feedback, and that closes tomorrow on the 17th of November. If today's the first chance you've had to engage in this information, and you have some feedback that you'd like to share, and but don't have time to do the survey, I'm happy to take that by email directly to me or through Jason. And the final thing that I'll give a plug to is the Design Ideas competition that we're running, Reimagining Where We Live. And that's really about trying to capture some of the creativity and the energy from the design sector to stress test the principles and guidelines, tell us whether we've got them right in terms of usability for designers, but also hopefully create some really exciting models of how the principles and guidelines could be applied both to an urban site and to a regional site, and demonstrate for all of us who aren't design experts what might be possible using these principles and guidelines in practice. So that's where we're at the moment in terms of thinking about implementation measures. Really appreciate your feedback and your interest today, and I think we've still got a bit more time for questions and discussion.
Thanks for that, Rob. We've addressed a number of questions in the chat on the Q&A function online, including a couple of responses to the last question there from Claire. I don't have any more questions at the moment, and I'm just checking participants. If someone did want to ask a question, I think you can click on the raise hand feature and I can give you access. There is another question aside now from Gregory. Leaving aside the cost of land, what is the estimated cost per bed to build a new 100-bed facility in a metropolitan area? That's quite specific. I'm not sure we can address it today, but I'm going to throw to you anyway, Rob.
I can't give you a figure off the top of my head, Jason, but I can give you sort of a two-part answer that hopefully gives you some assurance that we're thinking about it. So the Aged Care Task Force that I mentioned earlier, I know they've got some figures that they're working through of the modelling of what does it take to build a new home per bed. We also, as part of our project, undertook a stock take recently of existing aged care homes through the firm Arup. That was a voluntary survey open to all aged care providers. And what we're doing with that is taking the information that we were able to capture on the current stock of aged care homes and getting a quantity surveyor to do a higher level estimate of what would it cost to take this type of facility and bring it up to speed with the principles and guidelines. And that's sort of still in the estimating process, but it's a question that we're actively grappling with.
Sorry, I was on mute, had to do it at least once. Just noting, Peter Cooper has written in saying we're building 80-bed greenfield with budget of $600,000 per bed. So that's one for you. Okay, we don't have any other hands up, and we're only 1 minute short of time. So I think we can probably call it there. Thank you very much, Robert, Nick, and Liz, for making yourself available. Thank you very much to all the attendees who stuck around to the end and saying to drop off now. It really appreciated just having a very quick lunchtime session on those. We'll make the presentation and I think the slides available online on the CHA website, and we'll send that around shortly. Getting a few thanks coming through on that. Thank you very much, everybody, and hope to see you all again soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.